Hey, did you ever think, I want to write a book? And then wonder, what should I write about? Write about what you know. Can you imagine if someone who had an exciting job decided to do that? What if the police commissioner of Yonkers decided he wanted to write a book, a thriller? Guess what? He did. And he did. My name is Vinny Dacquino. Our next guest is Bob Taggart, the former police commissioner of Yonkers, New York. Bob, let's talk writing.
Let's do that.
Hey man, you did that. You decided you wanted to write an exciting book, and you took your past experience. Let's talk about that past experience. Who are you?
Well, I grew up in the city of Yonkers and grew up on the west side of the city, pretty dynamic neighborhood, not far from the Hudson River. And I enjoyed living there. I enjoyed growing up there, went to school there, and ultimately became a Yonkers police officer.
Wow.
And I have to say the job was very good to me. When I was a brand new cop, fresh out of rookie school, the department needed some fresh faces to do undercover work, and I was snatched right out of the academy and given a plainclothes assignment. And the problems at the time there were a lot of muggings going on, a lot of narcotic activity, particularly along the riverfront area. And we were assigned to undercover work, working plainclothes, to particularly look for muggers and for narcotics activity.
Wow, so you were like the Sylvester Stallone of Yonkers.
Yes, and I was brand new. We really didn't know what we were doing, but each of the persons selected for the squad was teamed with a senior detective. The detective would direct us as to where to go. And then, as I say, Yonkers is small enough that sometimes the faces of the detectives can become known to the bad guys.
Yeah.
So a fresh face doing undercover work was something that was helpful. Yes, I was, in fact, at the time, I was the youngest police officer in the city.
Wow.
I was 20 years old when I became a police officer.
Wow.
And subsequent to that, after my assignment was finished, I was assigned to a precinct, became a uniformed police officer. Worked in different precincts, initially in the 2nd precinct, which is the east side area near Yonkers Raceway. I worked those neighborhoods.
Wow.
And then I was transferred from that area back to the 4th precinct, which was the neighborhood that I grew up in, the west side of the city of Yonkers.
So you were an undercover cop in your own neighborhood?
Well, at that point in time, I had been transferred to a uniform
Okay.
duties. We had a specific time frame for our undercover assignment, and when that time frame was over, we moved.
Yeah, because
moved
you
back
can
to
only do it
uniform.
for limited time
Exactly.
before people get to know you.
Right, and then from there I made some rather remarkable advances. I was chosen to be part of a tactical patrol force, and we did primarily crowd control. At that time, there was a lot of demonstrations taking place, anti-war activities were going on related to the Vietnam War, and they had a tactical team that was designed to deal with crowd control and things of that nature. So that was my assignment. And when that era passed, I was still in the Special Operations Division. The Tactical Patrol Unit was assigned there. And one of the other divisions that was under Special Operations was the Motorcycle Squad.
Wow.
So I got transferred into the Motorcycle Squad. I did that for a number of years. And then there was some, as often happens in the city of Yonkers, there was some budgetary problems. They had to cut the size of the Motorcycle Squad. And it looked like I was going back to a regular patrol function, but I got transferred to the Warrant Squad. And that was an incredibly interesting job because I got to travel all over the state looking for fugitives who were wanted on warrants and, trying to return them to the city of Yonkers to face
So these are people who committed crimes in Yonkers and fled, and you had to pull them back.
Yeah. In many cases, the ones that I dealt with were persons who had jumped bail. They had committed a crime, they had been gone to court, were released on bail, and never came back. And those were the ones that I primarily went
you had to
after.
go find these people and dig
Exactly,
them up.
right.
Wow.
So I did that for a period of time, and then I got another undercover assignment. Again, I was assigned to the Street Crimes Unit, and that was basically, you went out into the neighborhoods and just blended into the neighborhood and watched what was happening on the streets.
Wow.
We primarily focused on auto thefts, commercial burglaries, and again, muggings and street robberies. And I was fortunate enough to take the test for sergeant while I was serving with the Street Crime Unit, and I was promoted to sergeant. And I went back to the 4th Precinct, back to my old neighborhood. I was the patrol sergeant in that area for a period of time. I was only a sergeant a very short period of time when I got promoted to lieutenant. So I served again in the same precinct as lieutenant. And then I had the good fortune of my fellow officers in the superior officers rank elected me to be the president of the union for the police superior officers. And I did 2 terms there, but I wanted to get back into the street and get back into doing where my heart was, fighting crime. So I opted not to run for re-election after 2 terms and went back to a precinct. I went to the 3rd Precinct, which again is a west side precinct, borders the Hudson River, and but the southwest section of the city. And shortly thereafter, I was promoted to captain. I became the youngest captain in the history of the Yonkers Police Department.
Wow.
And I think I still hold that distinction today. And took command of a precinct for a period of time. And then after 3 years as a captain, they made me deputy chief, which was really something I never really expected would happen. I thought that, captain was going to be
With your background, I expected.
I didn't expect it, but I became deputy chief. I served there for a period of time, chief of patrol, and then ultimately became the chief of detectives. And then finally, in the last 3 years of my career, they promoted me to police commissioner, and I was in charge of the department for 3 years. And then I retired. The journey took 39 years from the time I entered the job until the time I retired. And over those years, I have to say, number one, the department was so good to me. I think I had every kind of interesting and exciting assignment that any police officer could ever hope for. And I got to work with some great people in the department. And it just fills you with life experiences and the emotions of persons who are tied up in who are victims of crime, sometimes even the criminals themselves. The emotional aspects of their lives are so interesting. And I got to learn a great deal about people, about world events. When I became police commissioner, shortly before I became police commissioner, we had the terrible events of 9/11, which rose public awareness about terrorism. And I was assigned to the New York State Counterterrorism Zone 3 as an executive coordinator for counterterrorism activities. And through that experience, I learned a great deal about what's going on, not only in America from terrorist groups, but also all around the world. There have certainly been events, for example, in Russia, in Bosnia, where insurgent groups are creating terrorism within their own countries, doing tremendous harm to civilian people. And so I learned a great deal about that. I became somewhat interested in international crime, did one case with Interpol, but basically it was a life's experience that I just felt I wanted to share some of those experiences with people. It was not uncommon for me to sit around a table with friends and we would talk about cases, and I would try to tell them the background of the people who were involved, either the victims or the criminals themselves. Certainly cases that were closed that I was free to talk about. I never discussed active cases with my friends or relatives, but when we had a closed case and I could tell my neighbors and friends and relatives about the case, they always seemed very interested in every aspect of what I had to say, and they often encouraged me. They'd say, "You got to write a book. You've had so many experiences. You got to write this down." And I kind of shied away from it, but in the back of my mind, I remember that as a young kid going to school, teachers would give you assignments, what did I do on my summer vacation, why I love my pet. And I would write these imaginative stories, and my teachers always said, you have a very vivid imagination. You should write. And I just kind of blew it off, But I retired, and my wife takes care of my grandchildren. I have 5 grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
And she leaves the house every day. She goes to my oldest daughter's house. All the grandkids go there. And then, so my kids can go. They go.
Peace and quiet.
I'm in an empty house all by myself. I basically hibernate in the winter. A lot of people like to ski or snowmobile. That's not for me. When it gets cold, I stay in the house. So I found myself sitting at home, alone, thinking of things to do in the wintertime. And I said, you know what? Maybe I will write that book. Maybe I'll give it a try.
Were you a computer person?
Not really,
Not at
no.
all.
No.
So now, did you write on the computer? Or did
Yes,
you,
I did.
Okay,
Yes.
so you taught yourself how to do it.
Exactly. And it's not difficult. I used Microsoft Word and, and I don't even type very well. I had to keep redoing it over and, kept using that spell checker and what have you and doing it over and over again. But the thing for me was that I had this block of time when I would be alone, there would be no one to disturb me, and I could just let the ideas flow.
So your characters came to life for you. Now, did you have an idea of a storyline? How?
Actually, I did. Some time ago, a friend of mine told me what he thought was an amusing anecdote, and I had to laugh like crazy, even though it was somewhat of a sad situation. A friend of mine was undergoing a divorce, and when he first got put out of the house, as it were, he went to stay in a flea bag hotel for the night. And he talked about staying in this flea bag hotel, and he said, he was so bored, he didn't know what to do. He said, sometimes I just thought to myself, this must be how spies live.
Yeah.
And that started a thought going in my mind that yes, well, maybe that's a possibility, that.
Ideas are seeds that grow slowly.
Yes, and so I would think about that from time to time, a seedy hotel where somebody's staying who's a spy, and that was what I was thinking about. So when I started thinking about writing a spy novel, I recalled a case that we had in the city of Yonkers where this is back in the 1980s when the Cold War was really intense, when the relationship between the United States and Russia was very bad, and a great deal of spy
I lived those days.
Certainly.
Duck and cover. I was so afraid that any day we were going to get bombed.
Yes, school kids used to practice, get under your desk, because the atom bomb is coming.
I used to sit under that desk saying, wow, what if it really did ever happen?
That's the whole thing, the what if it really did happen. Yep. Well, we had an incident occur in the city of Yonkers where a Yugoslavian freighter was going up the Hudson River to the port of Albany, and a crew member, these are container ships, and the containers are very high, they're 4 or 5 stories high. A crew member had fallen from the top of one of these containers and landed on the deck and was very seriously injured. He had to be taken off the boat and brought to a hospital. The ship radioed for help. Our police officers responded to the riverfront with the aid of the Yonkers Life Saving Corps. They got a boat out to the ship, got the fellow off the boat, and they were taking him to the hospital when an individual showed up who identified himself as the security officer for the ship.
Whoa.
And he insisted that if we were going to take a Yugoslavian citizen off that boat, he was going with us to make sure that Yugoslavian citizen came back and got back on that boat. And in the interest of trying to save the life, we allowed this individual to come with us. Well, that caused a bit of a stir with the State Department and with Customs and other people. They had to be notified that, foreign nationals were taken off the boat and brought into the city, and they sent personnel to make sure that everything was being done properly. And unfortunately, the gentleman who fell, the seaman who fell, died as a result of his injuries. And what happened was the federal authorities gave the security officer a temporary visa to allow him to travel around the New York metropolitan area so he could make funeral arrangements, set up having the body sent back home, things of that nature. The man needed access to facilities in New York. Well, I started thinking, what if this guy that was a security agent, what if he was really some sort of spy? What if he now uses this opportunity that he's allowed to travel around New York to set up a spy ring or to do some spying? And that was the fodder for the story.
That's the wonderful what if that makes writing so exciting. What if, and what if this, and what if that? I remember a student one time said to me, I'm talking about writing, and he put his hand up and he said, "Excuse me, Mr. Dacquino, what if you want to write an exciting book and your life is boring?" And I said, "Play the what if game." He says, "The what if game?" I said, "Yeah, don't write about what is, write about what if. What if?" Now you have wonderful beginnings and wonderful pieces that you could pull together. You find yourself taking some of your experiences and putting them together for this book?
Absolutely, absolutely. There are scenes that are described in the book that they didn't necessarily happen to my characters. My characters are all fictional people, but there are scenes in the book from actual cases that we investigated. For example, I might describe a murder scene in a hotel room.
Yeah.
And the scene that's described is from a real murder case where I had the opportunity to see the crime scene and to know what happened. Now, it wasn't my characters who were murdered. It was some other person, a real life case.
Yeah.
But in my story, that crime scene becomes the crime scene in my story.
See, that's wonderful. I get to see a lot of books in progress. I work with writers in so many different capacities. And it drives me crazy sometimes where some writers try to write murder mysteries and they don't have the experience of knowing exactly what really happens at a crime scene. And sometimes they write about things that just would not happen. I mean, you just don't do that at a crime scene. So your experience of knowing what crime scenes really do look like and what criminals really think like could be amazing in this book. And I'm sure that's what makes this book work as well as it does.
I think it does. I think it contributes a lot. Also, what I've done in the book is there is some flashback to the 1980s and what conditions were going on, what conditions were like between the United States and Russia in the 1980s. I refer to real crime, real espionage cases, and real spies who did things in the 1980s.
That gives that sense of reality.
That sense of reality. And then what the book says is that these people that we're dealing with today, my crime takes place in the present day, are people who were somehow related to those people who are real spies in the 1980s. And the book draws you into the sense that people may not know, for example, that in Russia there have been terrorist activities committed against the Russian people. There was an incident where Chechnyan rebels took over a theater. 700 people were held hostage for an extended period of time, and many of those people in that theater died when the authorities tried to take back or tried to liberate them. Those people died. There was an incident in a school where again, rebels in Chechnyan area took over a Russian school and killed the children in the school, which is something we experience today. That these kinds of things happen. So much of those kinds of worldwide experiences that have occurred with rebel activity and with espionage and terrorism is included. Real events, real terrorist events, real espionage is included in the story. And then my story says that my characters, who are fictional, are somehow related to those events. And I think that people who read my book may find it interesting maybe to go to the internet and look up some of these events that have occurred and see that they are real events.
And find that they're there. Yeah, that adds a sense of reality. So give me the basic story line for The Poet and the Maestro.
Okay. The basic storyline is this. The reader doesn't learn this initially, but the reader will come to learn that there is a group in Russia of Russian military personnel who long for the old days when Russia was dominant, a dominant power in Europe. And they are determined to reestablish that dominant power in Europe. One of the things that is driving them to try to regain control is the fact that Poland has become such a strong ally of the United States. It was a communist bloc nation for many years. After the Solidarity movement, Poland becomes an independent nation. And at the time that I was writing this book, the United States was entering into an agreement with Poland to put missiles in Poland that could potentially hit Russia. And that the Russian military was very distressed by the whole possibility of that occurring. And so that becomes the impetus for them to try to destroy American shipping so that the missiles cannot be delivered to the United States, to Poland. And in doing so, they revive old spy networks that they had. They bring out these spies who were active in the 1980s. They bring them back. They say, look, we're going to make Russia a great country again, a powerful country again. We want you to establish your spy networks and report to us rather than to the Kremlin. This is an insurgent group in the Russian military. And what they do is they recruit one of their former operatives who was a Polish national. And they fail to take into consideration that this man is now living in a free democracy, that the man understands democracy, that he's very happy that the Solidarity movement has taken place. They assume that he's still a die-hard communist spy. And they tell him of their plan, and he thinks, this is not what I want for my country anymore. And he comes to the United States to tell the FBI that he is being recruited to be a spy again. And what happens is, you know, in today's society, there is less emphasis on Russian espionage. You know, we looked at Middle Eastern terrorism today. So when he goes to the FBI headquarters to tell them that, you know, Russia's going to attack the United States, they basically don't believe him. And they shuffle him off to a junior rookie female FBI agent. And they tell her, look, just take this guy's information and get rid of him. And, you know, they don't believe that he could really know what he knows. And she takes her report, but she suspects that there might be something more to what this man is telling her. And she opens a case, she begins an investigation. And then this Polish national goes to New York City, stays in a hotel, and he's murdered. So now the issue is, why was this guy murdered? It lends credence to what he was telling them. And now they know there must be something really serious going on. And my character, the FBI agent, Michelle Thompson, now begins to dig into the background of this Polish national, who he is, why he came to America, and begins discovering all sorts of persons who have been involved in espionage and counter-espionage in the United States, who are now actively working behind the scenes to either further the cause of the Russian spies or to fight the Russian spies. And a number of people are murdered as a result, and ultimately an arrest is made.
Wow, sounds exciting. So, so it's really not about domestic crime here. It's really international crime.
Well, here's the interesting thing I think about the book.
Okay.
It talks about international crime, and then the whole book begins to focus on this one murder. And what happens is, and I hope I'm not spoiling it for the reader, but what happens is, as you go through the book, they will solve the murder of the Polish national, but they may not, our characters may not have gotten a full grasp of how big this spy network is.
What's behind it. Wow.
So this provides the basis for the next story.
Very
Because
good.
they may very well identify the person who murdered the Polish national, but in identifying him, have they really grasped how big and how powerful this network
the tip of the iceberg.
Yes, this is the tip of the iceberg case being solved. And that's basically it. The reader will be left to know who the spies are in this book, who they pretend to be, and will ultimately...
So the book is out and available.
Yes.
And what is Bob Taggart doing now?
Well, actually, right now, I'm measuring. You know, I'm watching to see how much interest is generated in this book. Naturally, with a brand new book just on the market, it's been purchased mostly by my friends and relatives. But a lot of people who I don't know have purchased the book. And I am getting some feedback on what people like, what people don't like. And I'm trying to digest all of that, because I do have the idea that at least 3 of the people who are described in this book could come back and be fodder for another book. You know, there's some interesting characters here. What we have here also is we have one character who is a very mysterious fellow. We really don't know who he is. We learn a lot about him, and he is a young man who was growing up in the 1980s. He's just a typical teenage kid living in the city of Yonkers, trying to, you know, live his life. And in my story, his parents get on a flight, Korean Air Flights 007. Now, that flight was shot down by the Russians in the 1980s. Perhaps you recall it.
I remember that.
Yes, and so in my story, this young man whose parents are killed becomes a rabid anti-communist, anti-Russian person. And he appears in this book as well, doing whatever he can to thwart the efforts of the Russians.
Wow.
And at the end of the book, he's still out there. So the possibility is for something to happen with him.
It's funny, you know, what happens is some of these characters haunt you. You know, they once you plant them into your brain, they have a way of coming out again and finding their ways into your next books. So my guess is that's exactly what's happening. These characters are breathing life, and they're going to come at you.
I think so. I think the possibility is there. Certainly for Michelle Thompson, my FBI agent, I think there's a great opportunity for her to have a tremendous career in the FBI.
Yeah.
And I think my young man who was not very clearly identified in this book, I think there's a possibility that he'll show up again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this all amazes me, and what it does is it tells us that your past experiences can find their way into books. Could have a whole new life, and this is a whole new life for you after all those years serving Yonkers as a police officer. You're right. Don't let those wonderful experiences die. Do something with them, and you're certainly doing that. And the question arises: what do we do with a former police commissioner who was in charge of detectives, who saw all of these things? What do we do with him now that he's retired? We put him in front of a typewriter. We get him working. We get him to tell us exciting, interesting stories, and we read his books. So what happens to the police commissioner? This happens. The poet and the maestro. Well, I cannot thank you enough for sharing this half hour with us, but also for sharing your books. Keep writing. Keep doing what you're doing. We want to see more of this, and if you want to see more of it, get the book and read the book. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
Pleasure to
thank
have
you
you
for
here.
the opportunity.
Thank you. Remember, stay right here if you want to learn about exciting authors who have turned their lives into good reading material.